Hello and welcome to another webinar in our leadership series. Today's webinar is Improving Self-Awareness. I'm Dr. Donald Chick, President and CEO of New Synergist Consulting. Our services include leadership development and training, coaching, strategy development and support, diversity and inclusion training and support, as well as data analytics. Our motto is, we see you. I hope you enjoy today's webinar. We have several workshop objectives today. First, we're going to define the self and different aspects of the self. It's important to provide a definition so once we understand what the self is and what that means, we can start to talk about ways to actually improve self-awareness. One of those topics is to learn from introspection. What happened? Why did it happen? What does it mean? And what do I want to change or improve upon based on my knowledge of what makes me tick? We want to understand the nature and value of emotions, understanding that all emotions are valid. What's most important is how do we react to those emotions? We're going to talk about appreciating ourselves and others, having gratitude, understanding that while life is not perfect, we can do some things that can make it more satisfying, make ourselves happier, and be more productive and effective. And that leads us to our final thought. How do we improve our effectiveness? Let's start by addressing the question, what is self? To many, the answer might be so obvious that they haven't given it much thought. Others might discuss one idea after another and finding each one imperfect to an extent that they wonder if the self even exists. And if it does, can it be defined? They may or may not realize that this is a question humanity has been asking for millennia, with answers from different eras often addressing not just what we are, but who we are at that particular place in time. Now, the answer isn't a trivial one. Too often we stumble through life and take a shallow view of ourselves, our environment, and prevailing forces. And yet we can do better. We can be better. Our first step is to become aware of who and what we are. Now, this still fails to answer the original question, what is the self? No answer will be completely accurate or at all times precise. So instead, here's a temporary answer. Arguably good enough for the purposes of this webinar. The self is the aspect of an individual organism that is aware of its existence as an individual organism. It's the part of ourselves that we are referring to when we each say I, as in, I am thinking, or I am feeling. A helpful way to think about the self and become more aware of our complete and total self is to divide it into four aspects of self. The physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. The physical self is probably the most obvious aspect of oneself, our physical bodies. Awareness of our bodies when that body is in great pain or distress is usually strong. But when we feel physically neutral or just slightly good or slightly bad, we can block our awareness of the physical body and replace it with other levels of awareness. Awareness of our thoughts, our emotions, or other things. It is important to remember that each level of self affects the other levels of self. Feeling physically uncomfortable can lead to feeling emotionally uncomfortable, as well as feeling emotionally uncomfortable can lead to changes in our physical feelings, our physical self. At a certain point, examining one's physical self requires an examination of one's physical environment, such that what emerges is the recognition that the two mutually interact, change, and reinforce each other. This aspect of one's environment and one's self interacting with and changing each other is important to remember, not only in examining the physical self and the physical environment, but at all levels of self-examination. Just as there is a physical environment that interacts with a physical self, there is a mental environment, an emotional environment, and a spiritual environment that interacts with each corresponding level of self. The next level of the self we'll discuss is the emotional self. Being aware of oneself on an emotional level means being aware of one's emotions. In a culture that values concepts such as logic and reason, emotion often gets undervalued. And that's too bad. Think about others talking to you or talking to someone else when they become emotionally expressive, telling them, calm down, act rationally. I think you're getting out of control. Now, this might give you the idea that emotions are things to be avoided, but such a position is harmful. Emotions serve an important purpose in providing the self with information about its environment as well as motivation for what to avoid or what to embrace. In many cases, when we speak of our bodies or of our emotions, we speak in terms of feeling or sensation, things that come upon us rather than things we create. This can give the impression of passivity. We are slaves to our physical and emotional needs, but that doesn't always have to be the case. Rather than choosing how we feel, we might feel that feelings hit us and then we react. The most important thing to remember is that we cannot avoid feeling emotions, but we can intervene. And through our actions, we can change how we react to our emotions. Imagine you're on a football team, a big game. Quarterback throws a pass to you, an easy pass. You're a professional football player and you drop it. Now, a multitude of things can happen. One, you can get down on yourself and maybe give up. And even at a professional level, you might think, I hope they don't throw it to me again because I don't want to drop another one. Or you can take the other side of that equation and reflect on why you dropped the ball. What happened? I know I'm good enough to make that play. I hope they throw it to me again. And the sooner, the better. Now, on the other side of the coin, what do the coaches do? What reaction do you get from your teammates? Do they shun you? Or do they pat you on the back and say, don't worry about it, we'll get them next time. Hang in there, we really need you. You're important. We need you to keep your head in the game. Now, in this particular game that I'm thinking about, which just occurred, this actually happened. This player dropped a fairly easy pass. The very next play, even though he was covered pretty well, the quarterback threw a pass to him. And he caught it for a 52-yard gain which proved to be an important play in a pretty close game that this team eventually won. So think about how you react to positive or negative emotions. What do you do? What do you do to other people around you when they are reacting to positive or negative emotions? If they're part of your team at work, do you work with them? Do you, in the words of some, do you become their hype man or hype woman and tell them that they can do better next time, that we really need you on our team? Or do you simply shun them and go, wow, why did I have her on my team? That's the difference between understanding that emotions are real and they're not to be avoided. But we need to decide how we're going to react to those emotions and react in ways that make us and the people around us more effective. So how does the emotional self react to emotions? That brings us to our third level of the self, and that's the mental self. The mental aspect of yourself concerns your thoughts and your imagination. Like the physical and emotional feelings, thoughts also have the capacity to come upon you without your control. It's far easier, though, to consciously change your thoughts, especially if you practice. Practice being more aware of them in the first place. When people think, many of us think in sentences or words, but just as often we can think in images or words and phrases that act as a kind of shorthand. In these moments, it can become quite easy for thoughts to get distorted and not accurately reflect a true situation. So when we think about the mental self, think of the way we think about the environment around us. If our physical self is in pain or distress, how do we react? What do we do? Do we give up? Or do we seek help? Or do we do things that we know we should be doing to support the physical self? When we become emotional for some reason or another, do we allow negative thoughts, our mental self, to make those emotions even worse? Do we react out of pain or hurt or being treated wrongly? Or do we think about what we want to do and what is most important? And just one simple example that I like to share, when you're working in certain jobs, you might get a lot of emails in a given day. And it becomes almost overwhelming in many cases. And then you're already having a bad day and you get a relatively nasty email from a coworker. Emotionally, you're upset, you're physically tired, and your mental self says, push back, and push back hard. Well, one of the examples that I like to share, I got an email from a colleague that I really liked and respected. And it was a relatively, I'll call it nasty email. I was hurt, but I was also ready to go on the attack. But here's what I do, and I have this rule, and thank goodness I had it in this case. If I get an email where I have to answer, or where I feel I have to answer it in a manner that's mean or nasty or whatever, I may still write the email. But I give myself till the next day to decide if I want to send that email. And in practically every case that I can think of, when that next day came, I either deleted that draft or I modified it significantly, or instead of sending anything at all, I made a phone call. In this particular example, when this colleague sent the email, when I came in the next day, I had a message from him asking me to call him. So I'm thinking, okay, I'll give you a call. When I called him, he immediately apologized profusely. The email wasn't intended for me. He hit the wrong person on the email. Now, I believed his apology was sincere, and immediately I came down. And to this day, I have a really good relationship with this individual. What would have happened to our relationship if I had sent the email that I actually wrote before he called and apologized? So remember, as we have described in all of these levels of the self, these things are imposed on us by our environment, but how we react to them determines our effectiveness. The fourth and final level of the self that we'll discuss is the spiritual self. Now, this webinar is not about any one religious belief, nor does it reject religious beliefs either. And when we talk about the spiritual self, we're not using this term in a religious sense. Instead, the spiritual self is about your continuing sense of identity. The spiritual self is the realm of what a person values. It's the worldview. It's the source of motivation. If the emotional and mental self are about feelings and thoughts of a person in a given moment, the spiritual self is about the interconnectedness of thoughts and feelings over time that will form into a sense of personal identity. And this is important to note as well, because when I interact with organizations or when I coach individuals, we always talk about values. What are your values? As a matter of fact, if you've ever been involved in a mediation, if you can, bring in values. In many cases, you get two individuals or two teams or politicians on each side of the aisle, and they're arguing about things that they don't agree with. If you can start with values and understand them, you'll have a better understanding of your spiritual self and a better understanding of what's important. This will also increase your understanding and ability to know why you make certain decisions, why you react emotionally to certain things that happen in your environment, why you react in certain ways when something occurs that makes you feel bad. Why do you have certain thoughts? So understanding the spiritual self and focusing on these values is important. And one of the things we'll talk about at the end in terms of improving your self-awareness is writing down your values. What are they? Why do you feel that way? And what does that mean for your ability to be more effective? Now let's change gears a little bit and think about some of the things we can do to support those four levels of the self. And let's start with the physical self. While we live inside our physical bodies, sometimes we take it for granted or forget about it. We get so busy. One of the things we need to consider is, what are the physical stressors that can make us feel bad? Not just an injury. Obviously, if you fall or you're in an accident of some sort, or even just getting older, you may feel physical pain. But what are some of the other stressors that may be impacting you? How do we deal with them? The first thing to consider is exercise. Think about your endurance, your flexibility, your balance. How are they compared to where they were yesterday? Well, obviously, as we get older, those things tend to deteriorate. But there are things we can do. And there are people that are of advanced age, 60, 70, 80, that are able to do these physical things, even if there's been an injury in their past. So obviously consult your doctor first, but think about what you can do to exercise, even if it's as simple as taking a walk. Taking a walk, stretching, doing things that ask your body to do some work. They will also help with physical stressors that may abound, depending on the type of job you have. Another thing to consider is time management. One of the key indicators or key reasons for stress, especially in a busy environment, is not managing your time appropriately. Being under the gun to get things done or completing them just in time actually makes some people feel good, or they think they do. But it also creates or can create physical stress. And if it's not something that you like, and I don't know why just about anybody would, but of course everyone's different, then you need to look at some time management techniques that can reduce your levels of stress that can also create physical stress. Next is organization. Are you organized? Are you taking extra steps and extra time to get things done because you don't have any type of organization? Now that means different things for different people, but again, one of the aspects of understanding yourself is understanding what level of organization you need to be most effective. So we want to be aware of our levels of organization and be able to answer the question, is our lack of organization and or time management causing us to be less effective? Is it also creating extra stress that we can eliminate simply by changing the way we do certain things? Probably one of the most important things in terms of better time management is to create goals. And I use the SMART model in multiple workshops or webinars because it's a good way to make sure you have created goals that will actually help you become more effective. The SMART model includes first being specific. When you establish a specific goal rather than a general one, you are more likely to follow through. For instance, I want to be rich. That is not specific enough. Specific is, I want to have a net worth of $1 billion. That's specific. And then that leads to the next part of the SMART model, which is it measurable? One of the reasons for making a goal specific is so that you can measure successful completion. And the only way you could do that is, what's rich? One guy may say, well, shoot, I have $100,000 in the bank. I'm rich. While another person would say, wait a minute, I don't feel rich. My goal is $1 billion. Well, that's a specific goal. The third part of the model is it achievable? Don't make it too easy, though. If it's too easy, you can justify giving up on it because it's not important. So make sure you set goals that are challenging, yet still achievable. Fourth, is it realistic? While being ambitious can help you achieve large, seemingly impossible goals in some cases, being too ambitious can often lead to self-rebellion. If your goal is something that's nearly impossible, such as going on a spaceship to Mars or Neptune, you'll likely have many opportunities to give up on that. There's only a few Elon Musks in the world. But if it's achievable, by all means, I'm not telling you not to try it. And then it needs to be time targeted. When you decide on setting a goal, you also need to decide when that goal is going to be achieved. You must be specific. This allows you to manage, remember time management, your goal setting based on timeliness. So specific goal, I want to be a billionaire. Is it measurable? Yes, I can count that high. Might take a while, but I can do it. Is it achievable? That's when we start to talk about how we're going to do it. What are we going to do differently than what we're doing today? Is it realistic? Well, again, that depends. You need to determine whether or not it's realistic and whether or not you want to take the time needed to make sure you reach that goal. And then finally, is it time targeted? And the realistic and time targeted kind of go together. So if you're homeless today and you say, I want to be a billionaire, and your time frame is 30 days from now, I don't think that's realistic or achievable. Certainly, I don't like to think of anything impossible, but we want to make sure when we create goals that they use a model like this or similar to this. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time targeted. When you have clear goals, it becomes easier to set priorities. No matter how simple or complicated a task, anything worth accomplishing won't happen all at once. When you begin to manage your time effectively, you must be able to prioritize. An important thing, though, that tends to slip through the cracks when it comes to prioritization is scheduling time to have fun and relax. In order to be effective and creative, you need time to unwind and time to play. So please don't forget that. So here are 3 different strategies for prioritizing your tasks. The first recommendation is called Eat the Frog. This suggestion comes from a book of the same title by Brian Tracy. Essentially, this means that at the beginning of each day, pick the most difficult, most tedious task to do first. Whatever task you have before you that is the one you're looking forward to the least, make that one first. When you go with this method of prioritizing, keep in mind that over-planning or trying to get yourself enthused over it may be subtle ways to procrastinate. Instead, just dig in and eat that frog. The second recommendation is big stuff first. Before you go to sleep, write down the 3 most important things you need to get done by the end of tomorrow. Keep the list beside your bed so when you wake up in the morning, it is there as a reminder. Once you complete your big tasks, then you can spend some time on the smaller ones. The third recommendation is to use the Eisenhower Matrix. When you look at this matrix, the columns are either labeled urgent or not urgent. The rows are labeled important or not important. So if you get a task that's urgent and important, then obviously you need to do it now. If you get a task that's not urgent but is important, that's when you have some time to do some planning, to schedule that task. If you get a task that's urgent but not important, then you have some time to fit it into your schedule, but it probably needs to be somewhere near the top because of the urgency. If you're a supervisor, that's certainly the type of task that can be delegated. If you have a task that's not urgent and not important, then why are you spending time on it? maybe that's something you can eliminate from your busy schedule so you can be more effective in terms of dealing with the other tasks that are necessary. So when you look at these 3 recommendations, choose the one that's most important or appropriate for your needs. And also remember, make sure you take some time to relax, to reflect, and to enjoy yourself so you have the energy needed to be creative and to be effective. So let's talk about the emotional self. And probably the most important thing to understand about the emotional self is the validity of our emotions. Take, for an instance, your child knocks over a glass of milk at dinner, maybe for the second time at that seating, and you're angry. Is that valid? Well, maybe. Depends on a lot of things, but the most important thing is not to question the validity, it's to understand why you feel angry, why you feel justified in being angry in some cases, and then how you react based on that emotion or those feelings. Trying to squash emotions, particularly negative ones or even positive ones, can actually lead to serious consequences and even emotional breakdowns, or just feeling physically bad or emotionally bad. So we want to understand that our emotions are valid. Our job is to understand what they mean, why we have those emotions, and how we reacted to those emotions. One of the tools you can use in order to be more effective and understand your emotions is a tool called the Johari Window. We're going to do a deep dive on what this 2x2 matrix means and how we can use it to improve our understanding of our emotions and improve our self-awareness. So let's first examine what the Johari Window means. If you look at the columns, the left-hand column is the known to self column. These are things you know about you. The right-hand column are the things that are unknown to you, or the unknown self. And then when you look at the rows, the top row is the self that is known to others. These are things that other people know about you or believe they know about you. And then the bottom row is the unknown to others column or row. This is the row where people don't know this about you. So when we look at each block, the open self describes the information about you that you know and that others know. This is your open self. If you move over to the right, though, this is your blind self. This is information about you that you don't know and others know. This is an area that you ought to examine using a tool like 360-degree feedback or some other processes that we'll talk about in just a moment, to make sure there's alignment between what you think you know about yourself and what others think they know about you. So you can figure out why there's a disconnect, if there is any. And then on the bottom left, the hidden self is information about you that you know, but others don't know. And then looking over at the bottom right, this is the unknown self. Information about you that you don't know and others don't know. Now this unknown to others block row, especially the hidden self, and actually the unknown self as well, may cause you to miss out on opportunities for relationships, for job opportunities, and the like, because this is an area that's unknown to others. So if they don't believe you're good at being a good salesperson and you want to be, you're not likely to get that opportunity because it's not likely to be offered to you. And if you don't even know it, you're not likely to ask. So this leads us to the next topic, where we're going to ask ourselves what to do about those blocks so we can hopefully expand the open self block and reduce the size of the other 3 blocks in this matrix. So the first step, or one of the steps, is self-disclosure. Sharing with others what you feel about yourself. They use this tool in Alcoholics Anonymous all the time. You go there, and one of the things they expect you to say to your group is, I am an alcoholic. Now, in many cases, not really hidden, but in some cases it is. I can almost guarantee you that there's somebody in your life that you know well who has a problem with alcohol or drugs, and you don't know it. And maybe they don't know it either. And that's getting over to the unknown self, which we'll discuss in a minute. But one of the ways you do this is self-disclosure. So you have a conversation about what's going on with you to help you, as well as others around you, understand what that hidden self is. Another tool we can use is knowing others' input. Removing this blind self. What do you think about me? What do you think about my talents? Do you think I'm a good person? Do you think I'm a good speaker? Do you think I'm a good teacher? What do they think? And again, we have to be careful. And I'll repeat this. This is not necessarily about agreeing or disagreeing. This is about creating a better understanding, a collaborative understanding. So even if you don't agree with the information that you're getting, you can at least determine why you don't agree and understand why others may have that perception. So you want to open up that known to self by asking others who may be able to give you some insight based on their views of you and what they know about you. Another thing we can do to open up that hidden self box so we can get to information that we don't know about ourselves and nobody else knows is self-discovery. But it's collaborative self-discovery. Asking people, engaging with others, seeing how you may be affecting others. They don't understand why that effect is happening, and neither do you. That's that unknown self. You don't know it about yourself, and they don't. So this collaborative self-discovery can help you create a better understanding for not only yourself, but for others. And thus, you're more self-aware. And then finally, and when I say finally, that doesn't mean that each of these arrows is done in this order or anything. One of the things we want to determine is what's most important to ourselves at any given moment. So for instance, you may have a not so good relationship with a teenage daughter, and you don't understand why, and you believe that the relationship is not good because she doesn't really understand you. So this shared discovery may be the thing that you want to do first. It just depends. But we want to do all of these because the goal is to look at that upper left-hand block and expand that as large as possible. And then continue to work on it. Continue to be more self-aware. Continue to be more effective. Continue to have a better understanding of yourself. One of the best feelings I ever had in the workplace was a supervisor who I inherited, and he had a bad attitude. There were some things that's going on. I won't even say, and I don't believe it was all of his fault. But his reaction to it was to retreat and to try to become physically intimidating if necessary, if anybody intruded on his space. So one of the things that I did is I just took that on as a challenge. I'm going to get to know this guy. I'm going to give him some challenging job assignments, and I'm going to see if it works for him. And it did. I mean, it turned around to the point where I was amazed. I had no idea that that would happen. Most importantly, I found out later that the most important thing to him was to be treated with respect and to be treated as a contributor. So I got lucky. How impactful was that? He told me this was 2 or 3 years later, probably 2 years later, hey, I've decided to retire, but I want to tell you I appreciate you. When you first became my supervisor, my teenagers weren't talking to me. My wife was threatening to divorce me, and I was miserable. But when I was able to get something that was mine, a challenge, a piece of the organization that I was asked to turn around, and you told me you believed in me, everything changed. Not just at work, but at home. He said, my kids are wonderful. Me and my wife are doing great together, and I can't wait to enjoy retired life. So this thing about self-awareness is super important. And we and people around us are walking around, and we don't really understand in many cases how we're impacting others or how we're impacting ourselves. Now that we've talked about the Johari Window, another area you want to consider when you think about how to become more self-aware and more effective is to categorize your emotions. And for that, we're going to look at 3 different categories of emotions. The first one, or the first category, is a category for emotions that always help us to perform well. Emotions such as enthusiasm, confidence, tenacity, and optimism would fall in this category of high performance emotions. These high performance emotions are characterized as being high arousal emotions and as being emotions where our focus is wide and open. So if we're talking about high performance emotions, what about emotions that interfere with high performance or effectiveness? These are called blue emotions. These emotions are marked by qualities of low arousal and a narrowed or closed performance. They might include things like dejection, depression, boredom, and disappointment. So think about how those affect you. Just one like boredom. Hey, I'm bored. You're probably not going to be as effective. A third category for emotions will cover those emotions that don't improve or impede performance. Now, these emotions might include anger, anxiety, frustration, and they're called swing emotions because they can swing either way into motivating better performance or interfering with good performance. Take anxiety, for example. If someone is preparing for a test and they feel anxious about that test, that could lead them either to studying harder or freezing up. So think about how those types of emotions can affect you. So obviously we want to take advantage of the high performance emotions to be higher performing and more effective. We want to mitigate or eliminate the low arousal, low performance emotions that can impede our effectiveness. And when we get these swing emotions, and these occur a lot for all of us, or most of us anyway, we want to help ourselves react to them by swinging toward higher performance, higher effectiveness. Now, I want to throw out a fourth or bonus category, and that's simply calmness, relaxation, not worrying about anything. We need some time to decompress, to de-stress. And that fourth category, when we can get to it, is always important. But obviously we don't want to overdo that, as well as some of the other emotions, because dealt with appropriately, they can help us be more effective. But not dealt with effectively, we can just become lazy and unmotivated. Now let's talk about the mental self. We know how difficult it can be, and why we may not even want to try in some cases to control our emotional self, but we want to understand it. And part of that is dealing with this mental self. And one of the topics we'll discuss around the mental self is the style of thinking that we prefer or that we use, and when we should use it. Psychologists differentiate between two types of thinking styles, global and linear. Neither one is inherently better. However, they are different. The terms merely describe ways in which people process information. Global thinkers tend to be big picture thinkers. They're more interested in the theory or concept behind something than they are in the minute details. Conversely, linear thinkers are more interested in the details than in the big picture. A linear thinker will tend to prefer step-by-step processes for doing things rather than an overarching theory about how to get things done. One way to think about the differences between global and linear thinking is to imagine you're given a toy that is in pieces and needs to be assembled. If you're a global thinker, you're more likely to look at the picture of what the assembled toy looks like and attempt to put it together based on the picture. If you're a linear thinker, you will more likely proceed through the instructions step by step. While neither approach is wrong, in group projects, global thinkers tend to work well with and prefer working with other global thinkers, whereas linear thinkers want to work with other linear thinkers. Now, I know from the time I was a little boy, if I got a model car, I wanted to look at the picture and get on with putting it together. Always have been a global thinker. Now, while neither process is right or wrong, they're different, and the most important thing is to understand where you are. What I have learned, that sometimes global thinking can cause you to miss the details. And arguably even more important, if you're a global thinker, one of the ways that you can make sure you don't miss details is to hire people to work for you who aren't just like you. Get some detail thinkers. Have a diverse group of individuals who can look at a problem from different ways, and they'll likely come up with a better solution. And they'll certainly support you better than they could if you're like me, a global thinker, and everybody that works for you are also global thinkers. Another important aspect of understanding your mental self is understanding how you learn. We just discussed how you think, but ask yourself, how do you learn? The learning style is simply your preferred approach to taking in and processing new information. There are 3 learning styles, and understanding the learning style you prefer can help you improve your ability to learn new information. You do this by maximizing aspects of your preferred approach. Here are the 3 learning styles. 1. Auditory. People who learn best by listening prefer lectures to visual displays or physical activities. If you are an auditory learner, one way to improve your learning might be to record lectures so you can play them back later. 2. Visual learners. A picture is worth 1,000 words. They prefer PowerPoint to lectures, for instance. They also prefer to read information rather than have it told to them. And third, if you're a tactile learner, this means you learn by doing rather than have someone explain to you how to effectively use a chainsaw. You want to grab it and figure it out for yourself by using it. So when considering both thinking and learning styles, it is important to remember these are not discrete categories. A person can be primarily a tactile learner, but also exhibit qualities of visual or auditory learning. Likewise, a global thinker can also have linear thinking traits and vice versa. When we talk about thinking and learning styles, we are typically talking about preferred styles or styles that are most effective for a particular individual. So try to figure out what your preferences are and which ones make you most effective. Now, one of the ways also to be more effective is to understand your audience. What type of style do they like, particularly if you're giving a presentation or you're trying to convince someone to buy something from you or to fund your project or whatever the case may be. Understanding yourself and your preference, while understanding the preferences of others around you, can certainly make you a more effective learner, and in addition, maybe a more effective teacher as well. Next, we're going to talk about personality. And anytime we have a topic like this, we're going to talk about personality. Well, first of all, does personality really exist? If you did a brain scan and you tried to look for personality or holistic thinking or global thinking or the way people learn, you likely wouldn't find anything. Well, you wouldn't find anything. And this notion of I, where do you find it in the brain? So if you can't actually look at it in the physical way of looking at a brain, why do we study them? Well, a good analogy comes from mathematics. Triangles and circles, for instance, do not exist in the world as it was created. But understanding the properties of these can allow you to do things in the real world that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise. For example, triangulation, a tool used by early sailors to figure out how to get from place to place, helps you determine the location of an otherwise unknown point. Similarly, using psychological constructs allows us to think of activities such as learning or working together in groups in a certain way that we wouldn't get to without these constructs. For example, it's not as important to understand whether you are officially a tactile learner than it is that you find learning with your hands an easier or more effective process than other approaches. And thus, you can make decisions based on your personality and your likes and dislikes to support your learning, to support your thinking, to support your performance and effectiveness. As you become more self-aware, higher performance, higher effectiveness may put you in a position where you have to teach others, or you have to provide presentations or seminars or whatever the case may be. So you want to be able to address different styles of thinking, different styles of learning by incorporating those styles into your presentations and your interactions with others. One example might be you're a global thinker. So when you find yourself at odds, maybe with a boss or a teammate who insists on step-by-step instructions, instead of always fighting it, you might decide that, hey, I can learn something by utilizing that strategy, and I will learn how to provide that, even though that's not my preferred way of doing things. Another important aspect of self-awareness is active listening. Remember, communication is 90% nonverbal. So active listening helps the other person understand that they're important, you care about what they're saying, and you really mean it by showing it. So what are some things you can do? You want to use minimal encouragers. And what are encouragers? Short words or phrases that indicate to a speaker that you're paying attention to what they're saying and encouraging them to continue. These are words, phrases, or sounds. Yes. Go on. So what happened next? Repeat key phrases. This is another way to encourage the speaker to continue and to make them feel heard. A speaker might say, yesterday I went to the store to buy a loaf of bread. The listener can combine a repetition of a key phrase with an encourager. Oh, a loaf of bread. Keep going. Paraphrase, summarize the speaker's key points. So what I'm hearing you say is, or offer empathy when appropriate. That must have really been tough, or I can see why you would be angry. Stay in the moment and listen fully. It's likely to be tempting to interrupt because you've anticipated what the other person might be getting ready to say. But this doesn't help support active listening and making that person feel like they matter and that you care about what they're saying and that you want to hear more. So keep that in mind. Sometimes they may seem to be going a little too slow for you, but keep in mind this interpersonal awareness that helps make you and the other person, your teammate, your coworker, whatever the case may be more effective. The final level of the self is the spiritual self. And it might be the most important, largely because of the way it interacts with the other three aspects or levels of self and the importance it can bring to understanding the other three, how we think, how we learn, how we deal with emotions, and so forth. So let's start by talking about mindfulness. Mindfulness began as a Buddhist concept, but it's since been developed as a practice in psychology that has helped numerous people deal with anxiety, depression, drug addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, being mindful is not simply living in the present, but a way of concentrating on aspects of the present moment that you might normally take for granted. Buddhists sometimes use the term monkey mind to describe how our brains tend to barrage us with thoughts about the past, the present, the future, constantly. Becoming mindful means to become both aware of the movement of your thoughts and emotions and to become detached from them. This detachment allows you to focus through your true self rather than seeing yourself as thoughts, thinking, emotions, feeling. So if you are willing to practice mindfulness meditation, that may be the first step towards becoming mindful throughout every moment in your So there are two steps in terms of your spiritual life that you definitely want to think about. Practicing positivity and practicing gratitude. And there are different ways to do this, but you want to potentially use meditation or reflection and other tools to make sure you are practicing positive thoughts, to make sure you're developing a sense of self that allows you to say, yesterday was a bad day, but I'm here today, I'm still standing, I believe things will get better. And I want to express gratitude for having another chance to be successful. So I heard a story that this guy told where he said, when you go to bed at night, put your slippers as far under the bed as you can. Because when you wake up the next morning, you'll have to get on your knees to grab those slippers. And you can be thankful that you were able to wake up and challenge the day again. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and I hope it helps you improve your self-awareness and your effectiveness as a leader, as a supervisor, and as an individual. I look forward to presenting additional webinars in the future, and remember, as always, I see you.